Live. Going to tackle some life issues today on Catholic Answers Live. The second hour, we've got the wonderful, one of our favorite people here at Catholic Answers Live, really one of the brightest people we know and a very good heart. Stephanie Gray Connors will be here, and we're going to talk about, the general life issues. First, however, we're going to talk about one of the life issues that I think often gets left off the life issues list, maybe, or doesn't quite make the list in the way other things do, and that is war. It is a serious moral question. It's one that maybe we had a sense that as the world became prosperous and modern and secular, the question of war would evaporate, and we wouldn't have this question anymore. But exactly the opposite has happened. Pope Leo has warned in recent months, actually throughout the course of his papacy, about growing casualness about war, a kind of willingness to engage in war much more and with less reflection than maybe at one time we did. So in keeping with the ideas of Pope Leo, or the call of Pope Leo to think about these things and work through them, we're going to talk about just war. Is there still such a thing as just war theory? Should there ever have been such a thing as just war theory? And where does a Catholic fit in a world where warfare has become, I don't know if it's right to say more common, but has certainly not become less common, and has new moral dimensions that it did not have before. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Certainly the profession of soldiering, whether, like in the U.S. with airmen and Marines and soldiers and sailors and coasties and all that, the profession of that is something that the Church has honored as an act of charity, really, as a life of charity. That is, to be willing to offer your life in the defense of the common good, in the defense of the state, if the state is the protector of the common good, or the city, or whatever the historical context is. So we don't come at it in the terms of revising that history and saying something negative about the person who is willing to engage in that life of charity. The life of being willing to lay down your life for others is, in fact, a life of charity. But to say, this whole new web, this whole things that people hadn't really even thought of before. They thought of them, but they put them in movies like Terminator and stuff, like machines that fly around and kill autonomously, and many, many other things. Nuclear weapons, for example. There are all these moral dimensions to the consideration of warfare from a Christian perspective that were not around 100 years ago, and some were not around 5 years ago. So let's talk about just war. Here to help us do that, Tom Nash. By the way, you can call and ask your questions about warfare, 888-318-7884. The ethics, the morals of warfare is our topic this hour, 888-318-7884. Tom Nash, a very fine, precise, discerning theologian. I always like to work with Tom on things like this, because there's no histrionics one direction or the other. There's a willingness to listen to what the Church says and what reason says and try to work through it. Tom Nash, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Si. Good to be with you and your listeners on this very important topic. For those of you tuning in via YouTube, I am somewhat casually dressed.
You are? Who is that? Is that Solanus Casey?
Solanus Casey, exactly. Thank God ahead of time, which he recently we celebrated his, at the end of the month of July, his feast day. And also, just for our topic today, thank God ahead of time. Let's ask for his intercession that we can avoid these wars that sometimes, these protracted conflicts, such as we got with Ukraine and Russia, God have mercy, several years, other prolonged conflicts. And this is to be very clear, before we get into the issue and address the question, is just war and just war theory obsolete? Si, we want to commend all people who have committed their lives to serve in the military and have given, many of them, the ultimate sacrifice. My father served in World War II. Your father served Vietnam.
Yeah.
And as a doctor. My dad was a navigator during World War II. The thing is, though, in just war theory is putting these men and women into harm's way. And I remember a relative, somebody close to you at a recent gathering, had talked about changing her job at Camp Pendleton in here in Southern California precisely because she had like about 170, 180 students who had been orphaned or lost one or both parents, I think at least one parent, because of the protracted Second Gulf War and because of the trauma that inflicted.
And Afghanistan, all that.
Yeah, in
too.
Afghanistan.
Right,
So
where the
all
Marines were.
those conflicts cumulatively had impact on the students that she was teaching, and she ended up making a career change. So we just see the ripple effect. And again, we commend the men and women who are willing to make the sacrifice of their lives, but also we need to be mindful, hey, generals, presidents, whoever, let's be mindful of doing it as a last resort so that people need not be
And us as citizens
jeopardized.
too.
Us
Right,
as
yeah,
citizens
right. We have a
making
say
our
in that.
and then as well because there's usually fallout with non-combatants.
888-318-7884, the number. Your questions welcome this hour as we discuss just war. So let me just start with the question we said we would start with, Tom.
Yeah.
Is just war obsolete? Is the idea of a just war obsolete?
I think when one thinks about that and use the term outdated should not be equated with obsolete. That is, when Pope Leo XIV, in his recent encyclical Magnificat Humanitas, said in number 192, he said, "Today more than ever, without prejudice to the right of self-defense in the strictest sense, it is important to reaffirm that the just war theory, which has all too often been used to justify any kind of war, is now outdated." And so outdated does not mean obsolete, but rather let us consider the principles by which we're doing so, and we can get into his encyclical how he proposed that in number 199. But the whole point is it should be a last resort, not a first resort. And he notes that in the footnote, the related footnote in the document, he notes how it is easy to fall into an overly broad interpretation of this potential right, that is for just war. In this way, some would also wrongly justify even preventive attacks or acts of war that can hardly avoid entailing evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. And in this last sentence, he references Catechism 2309, which talks about the four conditions for a just war. It points out that indeed the moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good, the leaders of countries, generals, etc. But here are the four criteria. The damage inflicted by the aggressor or the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. We can think of World War II as a classic example with Hitler and his maniacal desire to take over Europe, take over the world. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. That's true with Hitler. There must be serious prospects of success. There was in World War II, the United States, especially European theater. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evils to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. And also, as an example of that, the direct attack on non-combatants, civilians, is clearly gravely wrong. We've discussed that before on the whole issue of Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
But I think it's coming up now with autonomous weapons. There's
Yes.
a fear that now I don't think anybody knows. Well, maybe a few people know how these autonomous weapons are intended to be used and intended to be deployed. But they're keep a human in the loop is the thing you hear more and more.
Well said. In number 199 of his encyclical, the Pope makes this point, these multiple points. It is not enough to invoke a generic type of ethics. Concrete for discernment must be established. He gives three criteria. The first such criterion concerns personal responsibility. When a decision to strike becomes automated or opaque, such as potentially could be with dropping bombs or drones, the risk of advocating responsibility increases. For this reason, the chain of responsibility must be identifiable and verifiable. Those who design, train, authorize, and employ technology must be held accountable for their decisions, particularly those who employ it. The second criterion pertains to the moral time frame for making judgments. While AI tends to expedite the decision-making processes, speed and efficiency, while AI tends to expedite the decision-making processes, speed and efficiency should never be the supreme motivating force for the irreversible decisions made in the context of war. So you don't act in a precipitous manner. You act in a reasonable. And just the one last thing, third criteria is the identification and protection of civilians. Any technology that facilitates attacks without seeing the face of human beings lowers the moral threshold of conflict. Target selection, the use of force must not confuse combatants and non-combatants, including with drones. He doesn't say that, I add that. Nor ignore the impact on defensive populations. So he's elucidating further, not saying that it's obsolete, but rather, hey, these are considerations all the more in an AI world where just war theory is presumed to be applied.
888-318-7884. If you've got questions about the just war theory, I've got one or two more I'm going to give Tom when we come back on the other side of the break. But just two lines open now. So lots of people have questions about the Catholic teaching on war. It does seem to me that it's necessary to say that one should expect the standards that the Catholic Church applies to moral thinking about warfare, as with almost everything, are higher than the standards that you will find in the secular culture. So as we consider this, we have to ask ourselves, am I thinking as a loyal son or daughter of the Father and of his church? Or am I thinking as a modern secular person thinks? And the latter will be less fruitful for us as Christians. We'll continue with Tom on Just War Theory right after this.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Support for Catholic Answers Live comes from Catholic Chemistry, a dating app for Catholics. Founded by a longtime member of the Catholic Answers team, CatholicChemistry.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1981. The FCC license to operate a satellite Earth station, the first ever given to an order of nuns, was granted to Our Lady of the Angels Monastery. Mother Angelica flips the switch and EWTN begins transmitting from Irondale, Alabama.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. The world as it is, not acceptable from a moral standpoint. That is, we've got a long way to go, and we know that when we think about, the so many of the various deviancies and chemical addictions and all that we've got in our world, the growing, the spread of vice. Really, vice is the reason it's called vice is not good for people. But among those things is war, and sometimes there's a reluctance to talk about war from a Christian perspective, and we wanted to do that today. And Pope Leo, especially Tom mentioned this in Magnifica Humanitas, his letter ostensibly on artificial intelligence, but he covered a great deal of territory in that letter, I must say. Towards the end is somewhat skeptical that the just war theory as we currently have it can properly deal with the modern world or the situation of the modern world. And that's what you meant about it might be outdated, but
Yes.
not obsolete.
No.
But it needs updating
Yes.
for the modern situation.
And praise God, in number 199, as we noted before the break, he gives three criteria to consider, and also to be mindful of how this AI has been being used, and the responsibility for using like drones or whatnot, automated weapons, as well as being distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants, because as you mentioned, Christian versus secular ethics, that oftentimes in secular ethics, it'll be like a consequentialism or proportionalism, that if you say that you can do evil, that good may come from it. So I'm going to shock and awe somebody, hypothetically, and take out some population so as to bring them to their knees. and that's a problem. That would not be acceptable, and thus we cannot talk about deliberate targeting non-combatants, annihilating them, but rather that it must be just and proportionate and distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants, as the Pope notes well in number 199 of Magnificat Humanitas. Also, providentially, we had this topic, Edgar, our producer, Edgar Lojano, set this up. But today, Pope Leo XIV issued his message for the 11th World Day of Peace, of Prayer rather, the 11th World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. That's going to be commemorated on September 1st, very shortly. And in summary, in place of the weapons of war, the God of peace grants us the grace, grants us the strength to heal, to reconcile, to build a civilization of love. He points out that war leaves wounds that extend far beyond the battlefield, tears family apart, forces millions to flee their homes, thereby deepening fear, injustice, and division, leaves behind social and ecological destruction that endures for generations. He said, war creates wounds that damage the whole fabric of life, harming not only individual persons and communities, but also their broader network of relationships, etc. And this is how he says, rooted in distorted desires and misuse of human freedom and power, war stands as a counter witness to the gospel of peace. So these are all things to keep in mind, and as to do all we can to avoid war, and it being a truly last resort, not only concern of the magnitude or the destructiveness of modern weapons, because even Pius XII noted after World War II, hey, this whole thing of just war in light of the nuclear weapons, you can't be fighting one with those nuclear weapons. We've seen other things. Our friend, our colleague, Joe Heschmeyer, if you want to go dive deeper, Joe Heschmeyer, H-E-S-C-H, Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R, Joe Heschmeyer, and put in his name in Just War, in quotation word marks, Just War as a term. He has 3 podcasts in recent years on just war theory.
888-318-7884, talking about just war. Not at all, I don't think, pretending that we have all the answers on it, but it's worth having a discussion about. As a matter of fact, I think the Pope is, to some degree, saying nobody has all the answers on it, that we need to work on this as a church, to consider the modern context and what does it mean to have just war in the modern context. So I hope we'll contribute to that a little bit. Your calls are welcome. One of the striking things about Pope Leo, from the first moments he stepped out in front of the world as the Pope, is that he has emphasized the peace of Christ. And so I think, Tom, and I would ask you for a short answer on this, Tom, because
Sure.
I've got a lot of people
Yes,
on
sir.
the line. But there are people who will make this basic argument that the peace of Christ is incompatible with any kind of engaging in warfare, that Christ has taught us a new way, and his way is incompatible with the military life, with military endeavor, with national wars, all of that. So could you just very briefly just address that? I know that's a big question to address briefly.
I would just say that's not consistent with Scripture. Scripture does not say we must be total pacifists. There is a right to defend. On the micro level, families have a right, fathers have a right to defend their homes, their children, etc., as opposed to letting assailants wantonly assail them. Similar on the macro level with regard to war. We have a right to defend ourselves, our country, and not be simply passive to somebody like an Adolf Hitler. So this is not the teaching of the church. The just war theory goes back centuries and centuries of the early church, and it's rooted in the Gospels, rooted in the letters of St. Paul.
And it's not a betrayal of Christ.
No, it's not a betrayal of Christ, because Christ points out that that there should be justice, and he talks about right and wrong, and that indeed the last judgment, right? I mean, that is on the ultimate macro level, where we will have to render account for our actions. So he holds people accountable, not just in the temporal, but ultimately everlasting realm, so too in the temporal realm. His church can provide guidance and teaching, and so too the temporal realm with the prudential judgments of nations.
We are considering the just war theory this hour. If you've got questions in that regard, whether you're Catholic or not, 888-318-7884. Ryan in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank you for waiting, Ryan. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking the call.
Sure.
I must admit I am very biased in my opinion, but I want to have a very meaningful dialogue about it.
Oh, thank you.
This actually goes back several months to the Flannel panel, and
Those
were
guys.
talking about just war, and specifically with regards to the Iran conflict.
Yes.
And I would like to go, if we can, point by point on what a just war is and why I believe that the Iran conflict should be seen as a just war.
That does sound like a profitable thing to do to me. So, but we won't be able to do it in an academic way. We're just going to have to do it, as you said, point by point. So you have to give us the bullet point. But your sense is that the current war or conflict going on in Iran is a just war. And you're right, at least two members of the Flannel panel disagreed with that. So go ahead and make the case. I really do want you to make the case, Ryan. It can't be, it's got to be, it's radio. So make it in a radio way.
I'll do the best I can. Now, again, let me admit my biases in that, one, I served in the Army for several years, and second, I have worked with the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, for several years as well.
Okay.
The reason that I would, and I'm still not quite Catholic, I'm in the elect, waiting for the annulments to finish up, but we'll be joining the church, God willing, sooner than later.
God bless you, sir.
Oh, thank you. So I'll be as expedient as I can. The reasons that I would say that it is just war, from a point of defending the United States, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And until September 11th, they were responsible for more American deaths than anyone. And the weapons that were used in Iraq, the roadside bombs, missiles, things like that, all exported from Iran.
All right.
You're currently looking at a regime in the Revolutionary Guard that, peddles narcotics, weapons all around the world, is trying to export their radical ideology. They are responsible for killing 10.
Okay, Ryan, I'm really sorry about this. It's just the connection is getting weaker and weaker as you're talking. You're not on a speakerphone or anything, are you? If you could, I really do want you to make your points, but we got to be able to hear them. Can you give us a?
Hear me now.
Just continue, because you're doing great. So a narcotics and weapons dealing regime in Iran is where we might have lost you. Go ahead.
Right. Where they are responsible for killing tens of thousands of their own citizens, repressing religious minorities. Those who convert to Christianity from Islam are killed. The Baha'i faith, the largest religious minority in that country, they have no rights. Their institutions are destroyed. Members are arrested and killed.
Okay, so
again,
I do feel like I'm getting the bill of particulars, but
That's more of an internal. Some of those things are more internal.
What's the argument that the U.S. should be in a state of war with Iran?
Sure. If we, as the United States, want to export, if you will, our democracy, our Christian values, the Iranian regime is completely antithetical to that. In addition to killing their own people, again, numerous soldiers, hundreds, maybe thousands of U.S. servicemen have been killed as a result of Iran or their proxies. Go back to the Beirut bombing of the Marine barracks. That was Hezbollah. Hezbollah is funded by Iran.
Right.
A lot of the...
So you would say this is a
Iraq,
defensive war, then? That we're defending ourselves against an aggressor?
Yes, because...
Okay.
The Iranians do not just confine themselves to their own country. They export their radical ideology to South America, to countries throughout the Middle East and anywhere that they're able to. So their very twisted version of 12er Shia Islam is one that they want to export throughout the world, not just to Iran, not just to the Muslim world, but globally. And
that, okay, it seems to me I'm getting the basic point that Iran, I'm trying to reflect your point, is a threat to the United States because of this global ambition that it has, and because it has, without question, of course, it has committed many violent acts against American soldiers in Iraq and all that. So did you want Tom to respond to that, or did you want to finish the argument and then we'll get Tom to respond?
That's, we don't want to take up too much of the other listeners' time, so I'll end here. And please, if you would respond, and I appreciate you listening to me, and I look forward to hearing What do you have to say?
Thank you, Ryan. Tom, so is Ryan on the right track as far as how just war works? Does this argument hold water for you, or are you unsure?
My concern, he mentioned about exporting Christian democracy, and we saw how, I think, when we're talking about dealing with a landlocked Muslim country versus Europe, or even with the Japanese, precisely because you're dealing with a...
Wait, you don't mean... I just want to make sure. This is not Afghanistan. This is Iran.
Yes, it is.
They're not landlocked.
Well, okay, we want to get back after the thing.
Yeah, we'll do it when we'll come back after the break. Ryan, I am actually I'm delighted that you called. I hope we can continue the conversation, but we also have a ton of people on the line, so a lot more conversation coming on the just war. But we're starting with a practical case, one that we all are familiar with from the news. We'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Want to be a more powerful witness for Christ? One of the most powerful evangelization tools you can acquire is, in fact, courtesy. The apostolate of courtesy is just the message the church needs in this time of diminished social grace. Inspired by St. Francis de Sales, author Robert Grieving shows how everyday manners, whether in conversation or emails, can make us powerful witnesses for Christ. Get the apostolate of courtesy today at shop.catholic.com.
Why do Catholics pray to dead people, bow to statues, venerate relics? And where do we find any of this stuff in the Bible? In the delightful book, The Saints Pray for You, Dr. Carla Broussard convincingly defends the ancient Christian belief rooted in Scripture that the saints care for us, that they're our allies. Order your copy of The Saints Pray for You today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Your favorite Catholic Answers books are now available on Audible. Whether you're commuting, taking a nice walk, or relaxing at home, you can deepen your faith with audiobooks that will make a real difference in your life, no matter where life takes you. Listen to trusted Catholic Answers authors explain the faith clearly, answer important questions, and help you grow in confidence as a Catholic. Visit audible.com today, search for Catholic Answers, and let the learning begin.
Feeling stuck? Feeling like you are not sure what's next? Well, you can be sure of this. God is not finished with you yet. In his new book, Not Finished Yet, Dr. Marcus Peters shares a powerful message of hope, healing, and transformation in Jesus Christ. Read it to discover how to overcome struggles, embrace grace, and step into the life God is calling you to. Get Not Finished Yet today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I maybe Tom will get into this a little bit, but one of the difficulties of discussing just war theory is that it's not a single issue. Of course, war involves a whole variety of issues. As a matter of fact, it's the great unleashing of violence that is war. It involves from the very smallest issues to how soldiers behave as they march through towns, all the way up to the big issues of should we be involved in this thing at all or not. So we don't want to pretend that there is just some kind of machine that you can put in your calculations and it'll tell you just war, not a just war. That's not how this works. Constantly, it's chaos. War is a kind of chaos, and that that taxes our abilities to make clear moral judgments. It doesn't eliminate them, but it does tax them. We got to work. Our brains have to work hard on this. So Ryan had listened to the Flannel panel maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and some of the members of the Flannel panel were being quite clear that there was absolutely no way that the American war on Iran could be called a just war. We did get a lot of pushback on that, and so Ryan made the case that, look, Iran is not an innocent party here that we just attacked. Iran has been waging war against the United States and her interests for a long time, and violent war, not just like, some kind of economic war or something, but actually killing American soldiers, which everybody knows is true. I mean, in Iraq, Iran killed many American soldiers and wounded many American soldiers. So they have been at war with us. So his take is, look, if they're going to be at war with us, and they're a fanatical kind of cult-like war machine. We have a right to defend ourselves against that. So how do you respond to that, Tom?
By the way, since you raised the issue about conduct, each and every aspect during a conflict, just a prefatory comment. In Catechism 2312, it says the validity of the moral law during armed conflict is, permanent validity of
permanent,
that.
Yeah, right.
So that, in other words,
morals don't change.
And that means each and every person marching through some particular village and not doing immoral things on the micro level. Regarding his comment, he mentioned about, and I mentioned landlocked. Well, Iran, strictly speaking, unlike Iraq, is not strictly speaking landlocked, but it is predominantly, overwhelmingly Muslim. And I think because of the looking us as the infidel, being the West, and they equate the West, Christian, et cetera, or even worse, modern, because it's more secular in some ways, that the trying to export that becomes itself a problem where they want to dig in all the more. So I think it's one thing to try to help people within their country, but regime change in which we try to initiate it from the outside, I think, as we've seen with the Second Gulf War, is highly problematic. Also, in June 2025, it seemed interesting that we did the big bunker buster bombs shortly after the Pope was elected, and this was supposed to dismantle their ability to produce nuclear weapons. But then several months later, and contrary to what our friends VP Vance and our fellow Catholic brothers in Christ, VP Vance and Secretary of State Rubio, the president went ahead again with the escalating the war in Iran. And so there's just concerns there because and then also the president sometimes used intemperate rhetoric. We're going to blow them back to the Stone Age and talk about taking out their infrastructure, which could, of course, hit those non-combatants directly and indirectly. I think we need to, when you're talking about that and the time, the money, the effort, and the potential damage and the carnage of the non-combatants, do we really have a proximate need? Are we really meeting just war criteria? I think we need to look for means by which we can deal with this otherwise, because when you're talking about escalating, and it becomes all the worse if there is a formal invasion.
Can I just push
Sure.
back? Push back just a little bit on
Sure,
it, because
sure.
I'm hearing the listener in the car pushing back a little bit in my
Okay.
head, and that is, okay, Tom, but you yourself opened this show with a description of that nuclear weapons change the whole calculus.
Yes.
So you have a country that is actively seeking nuclear weapons and missile technology.
Yes.
At what point are you obligated to defend your country before someone drops a nuclear bomb on you?
I got you. And I think that preemptive strike of June 2025, where there was supposedly the bunker busting, destroying their capacity, and I was saying, well, it looks like they might still have it. I think those defensive measures where you're talking about military targets and disabling the ability to make nuclear weapons or distribute them, those are the means by which, if you want to do something preemptive where you're not dealing with non-combatants, you're not damaging infrastructure, those are the means by which you should do, as opposed to getting into a wider conflict and invasions or targeting civilians in a direct or indirect way. Those are the ways to go.
All right. I'm going to let that be, Ryan, and I hope I didn't give you too short a shrift. I hope I let you make your point, because I really wanted you to be able to, but I don't want to be rude. We asked for calls, and every single line is full. I'm going to try to get to everybody. Matt in Nebraska, welcome. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Hey there. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
My question is drafts and drafting young men for war. The idea of men having to fight somewhat against their will.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Catholic Church have any teaching or framework as to whether, it's on the individual to weigh the factors of the war?
That's a great question.
And individually make that decision.
Okay, so you get drafted to serve in your country's military, in your country's at war. How much are you supposed to just do it because it's your duty, and how much are you supposed to question it morally? Did I frame that well, Matt, or no?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
Tom, help us out there.
Sure. This one's covered in the Catechism, Matt, 2312. 2311, I should say, public authorities should make equitable provision for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. These are nonetheless obliged to serve the human community in some other way. So you can have conscientious objectors. That movie that Clint Eastwood did, Hacksaw Ridge, there was a guy involved there who was a conscientious objector, and he ended up saving a lot of people. He did not himself bear arms. So there is provision in the church's teaching that allow for conscientious objectors, and the United States, to one extent or another, has honored that as well in its practices. Although, some people have gone. You can argue some of the cases of people drafted and had second thoughts, and there they were in the Vietnam War all of a sudden in a protracted conflict. And God bless all the men and women who served there. But yes, there is provision in the church's teaching for conscientious objection, and the United States, in its prudential judgment, has traditionally recognized it as well in a number of cases.
But Matt should know that the United States law and the church disagree on one thing. The United States law does not allow for selective conscientious objective, and the U.S. bishops have said repeatedly that for the law to be just, it must allow for selective conscientious objection. Meaning, if you are a conscientious objector who's Catholic, who objects to war, you're a pacifist or whatnot, then the military must respect that. But the church says that's not enough. The church says if you are drafted and you say this particular war is unjust and I won't fight, the government has to respect that. And that is not currently the law of the United States. I'm going to just keep going. Matt, I'm going to say good. Thank you. Max in Dallas, Texas, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question on the just war.
Hey, guys. Thank you.
Sure.
So you just answered a couple of my questions really well, but I was thinking more in a personal way. When is it acceptable to be gifted martyrdom versus being called to defend yourself?
Yes, good question. And we've got the examples of the early church. Ignatius of Antioch, it was quite clear the Romans were going to martyr him, but he ends up writing 7 letters on the way to Rome circa AD 110. And so he was able to offer his life. I mean, when it becomes inevitable, then you can offer it up, and you can hopefully say, Lord, as our Lord did on the cross, forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do, or in that sense, forgive them because maybe they're not as culpable. We pray for, in the very act of dying, we offer ourselves up for them, realizing that our ultimate enemies, as I regularly say, are powers and principalities, not mere human flesh, as St. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, so that in that regard, one could offer himself up if he has no recourse to save himself for the good of the person who is persecuting or martyring him. In addition, I would say if someone has responsibility for his loved ones, then he should do all he can to take care of those loved ones, wife, children, etc., etc. But if someone cannot do anything, like Archbishop Romero, who was canonized a number of years ago, he was martyred while celebrating, offering the sacrifice of the Mass. You put yourself, I think the bottom line is St. Thomas More said it well. It's in our nature to escape, as well said in the movie A Man for All Seasons. But if God brings us to that martyrdom, then we accept it. So we do all that we can to sidestep it in a moral way. But if it becomes inevitable, then we give the best witness we can with calling on God's grace.
Max, thank you. If it seems like I'm going quickly, I am a little bit, because there's so many good questions and I want people to have a chance. Paolo in Winnipeg, Canada. Paolo, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. This is very timely as I prepare ethics and social justice classes for my senior students here.
Wow.
So I'll get right to the question. Your guest, and I'm afraid I missed the name at the beginning of
Tom Nash. Yeah.
Tom Nash, Mr. Nash, thank you. You alluded to the comments that President Trump makes sometimes intemperate, as you described them.
Yes.
And I'm curious, because that, looking from the outside in and observing from up here, this is one of the things that frustrates me often with President Trump, is that his use of language is, I guess not careful, to put it charitably. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts. To what degree is language important in the sense of promising or threatening war? To what degree can that be weaponized and just and or unjust? If I'm making sense
it's
with
very
my
clear,
question.
Paulo. Thank you. Thanks
Yes.
very much.
Thank you, Paulo. I think it's very important. People will point to President Trump. Of course, President Trump had campaigned on not getting into wars and opposed the Iraq Second Gulf War. I think language is important. People say that's part of his negotiating tactic and he's being bombastic. But I think it sets a bad precedent because others can say things and they can agitate others to perhaps carry it out on a local level. Like, yeah, all right, he's maybe pausing, but we're going to do this. It might give fuel to the fire, in other words. I think it needs to be, one needs to have pause. Henry II, I remember, he said, "Who will rid me of this man?" regarding St. Thomas Becket. And people took that as a soft call to take him out, in which he was martyred himself. So I think language is important. It's important to be temperate. It's important to be measured because it sets a problematic precedent for the next person or for somebody else who might be the person next in line. And we also got to remember the consequences of our words on the local level. And we therefore all the more want to be charitable, temperate, and avoid needless inflammatory speech.
Is it like if you say things like, for example, this is what concerns me about President Trump, so I will just express it to you. If you are a guy who is the commander-in-chief of thousands of nuclear weapons, and you say to a population, "I'm going to end your civilization," it seems to me that that's not merely bluster. That is actually a practical threat. Like you have it within your power to end their civilization. Does that make it immoral to terrorize people that way?
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. And for those who may be calling and wondering, I myself have voted for President Trump. I would be constructively criticizing him. The point is like he said about avoiding war. And when you get into that kind of rhetoric and potentially terrorize people on the local level, may think, "Oh, we know Trump, he's not going to do that." But it's needless inflammatory comments that can, on that local level, say, "Darn, he might just do that." And what's gonna happen if he does? So I think, when you're talking about bombing someone back to the Stone Age or ending a civilization, that's rhetoric that should be avoided. If you're talking about taking out a problematic person like Adolf Hitler, where you have Pius XII, who helped with as the Church of Spies, Mr. Rebuke, who's wrote his book Church of Spies, where the Pope helped with the cause of assassinating Hitler, that's a different ballgame. You're targeting a maniacal leader. You're not threatening a population in general.
Paulo, thank you. We're at the break. We'll be right back. More calls. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. I'm so glad we're having an open conversation about just war. If it's not satisfying to you, you're welcome to get on the one line that's open, 888-318-7884.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
Alexian Brothers is a proud sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. For 800 years, these Catholic brothers have offered a prophetic and daring response to the gospel, serving Christ in the sick, the poor, and the dying. Is God calling you to be a courageous disciple? If you feel called to total self-giving as a religious brother in the mission of Jesus, call our vocations office at 847-264-8703. That's 847-264-8703. AlexianBrothers.org. In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
EWTN offers listeners and viewers the daily readings to enable you to accompany the Mass of the day. Our Catholic daily readings include the readings of the day, along with online videos. It's a great resource for all who desire to live a life of faith that is pleasing to our Lord. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Talking war. Pope Leo he did today, and he has many days, and clearly would like a reevaluation of the current state of affairs around the world. I know often as Americans we think it's all directed at us, but it clearly is not all directed at us. He's over there in Rome, so he sees a lot of stuff. So, but that is not to say we're off the hook. It's not all directed at us, but clearly there has been a lot of American engagement in warfare over the last 25 years. I won't go before that, but that's enough. That satisfies 25 years. So the Pope would like us to reconsider it, and so we are doing that right here. And with your questions and conversation, 888-318-7884. I'm going to go to Roanoke, Virginia now. Travis is in Roanoke, Virginia. Travis, thank you for the call. Go ahead with the question.
Hi, Sal.
Hi, Travis.
How you doing today?
Really good.
So my question, I guess I'll get to my question. Could we, as Americans, and I know the whole thing with Iran owning nuclear power and nuclear weapons is a big cause for concern, because I believe they wouldn't hesitate to use that power on, whoever they can use it on. But are we allowed to, as Catholics, to disagree with the Pope on his stance? Because it seems like the Pope is pushing for peace. He wants peace between the nations. But for a long time, the West has been at odds with, like the Muslim countries, and could we disagree with the Pope and say, we just don't buy it? Can we still be good standing Catholics and disagree with the Pope?
Could I clarify something with you, Travis? Do you mean disagree on the particular instance of a particular war, or in general about the teaching on just war?
I would say just war.
Okay.
Because the country of Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons, basically.
Gotcha.
They're trying to get them, and
right.
I wouldn't doubt it for 1 minute they would ever use that power against some of their neighbors.
So can a Catholic disagree with Pope Leo's take on war with Iran?
Yeah, and it's not just that. He's talking about more, this whole preemptive activity, which I think Travis is saying would be justified as in this particular case because of the fear of what Iran would do. I think we need to be mindful of falling into the sanctioning of preemptive action. And again, in June 2025, there was the bombing, the bunker buster bombing, which was supposed to nullify their abilities. And now then there was the increasing, as which VP Vance and Secretary of State disagreed. Secretary of State Rubio disagreed with the president. They said, "Oh, but we'll back you." I think the principles, we need to be as faithful Catholics to recognize that those principles are there, and defensive measures need to be done in a way that takes out military installations and is mindful of not, escalating war and affecting non-combatants. Those principles need to be mindful. I would encourage Travis and everyone to be mindful, or to take a look and meditate prayerfully on number 2309 of the Catechism. At the same time, it is true that the Catechism, the same Catechism 2309, says the evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. I think the Pope was just pointing out we are likely to escalate things. I agree with him on historical issues with regard to Muslims. And after the Crusades, there were imperialist Muslim incursions into Europe. We've got the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, lesser-known Siege of Eger in Hungary, 1552, 1671, the Battle of Vienna. Those were defensive measures after the Crusades properly understood, where the Church defended itself. I think those need to be distinguished between something like this, where you talk about disabling versus escalating into an armed conflict, which, jeopardizes combatants. This is where I think the principles need to be applied, because if you get into all kinds of preemptive wars, like the Pope has said in his encyclical number 192 and 199 of Magnificat Humanitas, you get into real issues of escalation and with the power that can be done with these weapons, we don't want to go there, and thus we need to be prudent and do all we can, with realizing that our ultimate enemies are not flesh and blood, but the powers and principalities. And yes, we can work toward a just peace, not to be naive about it, but to try to do all we can.
What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I like that. Also, I would like to mention in the Old Testament, when I read the Bible, it stated that in the old days that God would go before the people, usually Israel or the Jews, and he would fight their wars for them. We need to depend on God to get us through. And
Travis, I appreciate your call. You will forgive me if I just leave it there. I'm going to let you have the last word on that because I want to get to the next caller. I do not want to leave people hanging this hour if I can help it. Peter is in Los Angeles. Peter, welcome. I'm sorry we left you only about 3 minutes, so if you could go quick with your comment or question, and then we'll get a response from Tom.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question is regarding dispensationalism. Should Catholics do more to rebuke our evangelical countrymen on this theology, which seems to have greatly influenced this country's military decisions?
Thank you very much. Dispensationalism, which anticipates the rebuilding of the temple and a war of Armageddon, and therefore, hey, why not have a war in the Middle East? Of course, if you're in Israel, you might not like that, or otherwise the Middle East. I talk about that, and should the temple be rebuilt on our Catholic.com if you want to go into more detail there. Joe Heschmeyer deals with that in his podcast regarding the war. Yes, we should charitably say, look, we need to be preemptive about war. And I think dispensationalism, which inevitably sees an armed conflict coming in the Middle East and the rebuilding of the temple, which of course would agitate, to say the least, Muslims, because the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, would have to be removed to do it, in most people's interpretation, that we need to be following the Prince of Peace and to avoid these things. And this is dispensationalism, by the way, is only a latter day, since the early mid-1800s view among some Protestants, but they are prominent, and their impact on our foreign policy has been made felt. So we want to do all we can to avoid war and follow those good, just war principles in Catechism 2309.
What do you think, Peter?
No, yes, thank you, fantastic. And I can't help but think that even though that's not the what people says that drive as the motivating factor primarily, but it seems to sort of leak into the subconscious of the American people, which is what troubles me.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line is God bless the former governor Huckabee, who's the ambassador to Israel. I think we need to be mindful of trying to take our religion in a way that's going to impact our foreign policy, and realizing, not being mindful of non-combatants being jeopardized by an escalated war in the Middle East. So I would charitably disagree with dispensationalism. You can read more about it in our St. Paul tract, as well as my presentation on dispensationalism, which about the temple being rebuilt or not, and Joe Heschmeyer in his podcast.
Peter, thank you very much. I'm sorry to those that we have left on the line, but we have come to the end of this conversation. But it does make me think, just the sheer volume of calls, Tom, makes me think we need to talk about war a bit more.
Yeah, so that we can hopefully preempt war.
What is it good for?
Yeah, God have mercy.
You didn't even do the second part of the song.
Absolutely nothing. Well, there is, because we affirm just
true.
war.
That's right.
We cannot say absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Good ending.
Tom Nash has been our guest, and I thank you so much, Tom. We gave you the hardest assignment this week. I mean, it is a tough one, but we'll try to devote more time to it, because Pope Leo has asked us Catholics to be considerate of this, to be considering this. And so we will try to respect that call of Pope Leo and do our tiny little part. If you don't know Stephanie Gray Connors, I hope you'll hang around and listen to her. She's one of the best pro-life, one of the best defenders of life in the world, on the planet Earth. And we're going to ask pro-choice callers to call. So if you're a pro-choice caller, if you are a pro-choice person, 888-318-7884.